It's very intuitive of you as a musician.
You
Like
got to get all the
knowing,
good stuff.
yeah, exactly. Knowing
You know
things
how it
change when
is,
that little red light goes off.
right? So welcome. It's been a while.
Yeah.
It's a storytelling podcast, so I'll start with a story. I'm not a huge sports fan. I like MMA, but I find there's something kind of beautiful about seeing all the fans get together and celebrate. We live in Toronto. Well, I don't anymore, but Toronto is our closest home team, I guess. And Toronto doesn't win a lot, but the Raptors just won, and we were together that night. We had a little dad dinner, and then there may have been a box of wine and a pickup truck involved. But that was one hell of a celebration and a lot of fun just to see that much energy all downtown. And I walked back through it the next day, and how little destruction Toronto actually did, considering how big of a celebration it was. Pretty magical.
Yeah, it's so funny. I always think about that specific event when the Raptors won. What was it, like 2018 or 2019 or something?
2019, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, 2019. And I think about, how that was sort of the first time, at least I've experienced Toronto unify in that way. Like I've been in the city for, I think it's like 17 years now or something like that. And I've never seen anything like that ever. And then but I also kind of, it's like that happened. We were all rejoicing on the streets together as a unified people. And it was like 2 days later, after the parade or something, everyone went back to their individual boxes in the sky with like a Raptors flag in the window. And like, that was that, I was like, oh, is this going to be a new sense of like community in this city? No.
No, it wasn't New York City in 9/11. I mean, it was
right,
just the Raptors winning, but yeah,
sure.
we don't. Yeah. I remember when the Blue Jays won, I was just young, so it wasn't nearly the same thing. And I wasn't actually in Toronto at the time, so didn't get to see that. But yeah, just to see Toronto all kind of come together like that and party. And like I said, everybody was quite well behaved considering, I've seen, I remember like the riots in Vancouver when they won and different places where they trashed their city. I was really impressed with Toronto that they didn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a thing you don't want to do when you're celebrating, right? Like it's one thing if you're upset, but if you're celebrating, why would you want to trash your city, I guess,
Right? Yeah, I remember seeing that they're like flipping cop cars. I'm like, what? Why? But I guess that's the way things go sometimes. So just in case it does come up, we have some code words on this podcast so that we don't get censored on YouTube.
Okay.
About the last 2 years. So we don't talk about that thing. We call it the joy. There's some people who got lollipops for the joy and some people who remain sugar-free for the joy. And sometimes people would put things on their face just in case it comes up. Warn you ahead of time so we don't get censored. But in the storytelling vein, I like to get people to tell us their superhuman origin story. So the thing that made you, which will lead into what everything else we want to talk about. Because before we ever met, we had some mutual friends, and they would always be like, you have to meet this girl. She talks about fear in the same way you do. I think you guys would really, connect on that. And I have had the chance to listen to what you do as well since then. And I am very impressed because not enough people really focus on that. It's in all of us, right? But before all of that, there was a little girl who grew up and now she's you. So tell us the superhuman origin story.
I mean, I don't know if I have a superhuman origin story. I think maybe when I was young, I would have liked to believe I was superhuman. I think that this is probably such a boring answer, but I think that every circumstance of pain and joy and every single thing we go through is what makes us up. In my childhood, I had a mix of really good times and really, really devastating times. And, it was traumatic, the devastating times. And one could argue that the trauma that I experienced was the catalyst for achieving, let's say, a lot really young. I'm careful around being like, my trauma made me who I am, because I know that there's people out there still in the middle of it and saying, basically, fuck trauma. Are we allowed to swear on this podcast? Sorry,
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, like, I know there's still people in the middle of it saying like, screw that didn't make me who I am. It devastated my life. And I fully understand that. I do. And a part of me feels the same, but yeah, I mean, I hate believing this, because I don't want to believe that it's like suffering and pain that causes humans to do great things. But I think that there's truth to that. I don't think you need that to do great things, but I do think that that's partially, if we were to look at, let's say the quote unquote great things that I've done, or that one could consider are great. Yeah, some of that came from, the drive of, wanting to escape hell. So, I guess that's all I can say about it. It's vague, but it's also probably more than enough information.
When you were young, what were your hobbies? Like, what kind of did you get into?
I got into performing quite young. I was, I think I was put into gymnastics around 5. I did that for a few years. I did dance all throughout my childhood. I did martial arts at 10 years old for about 9 years. That was the gist of it. But performing, that started also around 10, and essentially my summers consisted of rehearsals and being on stage, and most of the year did too, but it was like mixed with school, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was,
What,
yeah. The gist of it.
One of the many things that you do is singing. So when did you really get into that? That was very young as well.
Yeah. When I say performing, I mean singing. I mean, I was doing live productions, that involved dancing and acting as well. But it was centered around music and centered around singing. And yeah, my first, let's say, public appearance was when I was 10. And then consecutively, I performed live throughout my childhood until I was 18 and landed my first professional show, and then moved to the city after that and continued to perform live.
There's kind of two versions of us. There's like, the performers who just want the spotlight and kind of need to be in it, and you can see like it's a different type of enthusiasm. And then there's the other ones who really love this art form, which requires you to be in a spotlight. And we kind of reluctantly walk out onto the stage and into that light. There's a reason for that, which is based in fear. It's a fear response of, performance anxiety, whatever you want to call it, but it's a fear response. Is that something that you found was always present for you?
Such an interesting conversation. I guess specifically for me, because I feel like this is something I'm really reckoning with right now in my sort of adult music career. Which is it? What really was behind the drive? Is it different now? Is it the same now? I think the way I remember it is when I first stepped on stage, prior to high school, it was just the joy of music. It was the love of how I felt when I would open my mouth and sing and when I would dance. And then high school came around and all the things that go with that, bad skin and insecurities and wanting to fit in and all of that. And I started to really struggle with stage fright at that time. So if you do know my material and you've probably heard bits of my story, I talk about how I struggled with stage fright for over half of my career. And it started about that time, around like 14, 15. Yeah, and all kinds of shit started to go sideways around that time of my life, personally. But yeah, so it's like kind of switched into this like fear response, fear driven sort of I guess action in music, and that lasted for several years. And I think I never lost my love for music ever, but it got really muddied from high school all the way through my 20s. Like it was just a mixture of love and hate and fear and joy and everything that the music industry has to offer by way of like narcissistic abuse and like coping with that. I mean, yeah, there's a lot to say about that, but I guess the short answer is it was both. It was definitely both. Not initially, then it really, really, really was both. And then now I'm starting to come out, I feel, the other side where I'm starting, trying to detangle the fear and the proving, like that component of the drive, and getting back to just like, what did it feel like when I just loved it and there was no fear.
I definitely understand, because I've always kind of struggled being in front of people, but it also comes really natural to me to perform.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always joked, and it's part of why I have two names for doing it, that I have like an alternate personality or a mask that I put on so that I can get up on stage. Mm-hmm. With the mindsight as an example, it was like being able to take my glasses off and put my hair down. It was that kind of transformation before I would go on stage. And that was symbolic of, exactly the transformation that I had to create within myself in order to be able to do that. Because you see this talent, first of all, and I really hate wasted potential. So especially myself, and you see this talent, you're like, okay, everyone's telling me that I can do this, so I probably should. Oh, and I love doing this. It heals parts of me that I didn't even know were broken while I do it. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to be in front of people. So how do I reconcile the two? Yeah. Or the three, I guess, as it is. So it was an ongoing process. Like, it's not like a one and done. Oh, this is what I'm going to do, and now I'm better. But it's never the case with anything, really. Yeah. But I found that persona, even like I said, changing the name, that little bit of a ritual would make it real for my mind, so that I could go out and do the performing that I needed to do. When you're in a recording studio, it's a different type of anxiety, because you're close to your peers a lot of the time, or like friends, people that you really respect. Like, it's very rare, you would know as a vocalist, very rare that you would be in a booth singing for someone you don't care about, you know what I mean, or don't care for in any sort of way. So that's a totally different type of thing. And again, it would require this shift in psyche in order for me to even be able to do it. So I don't think this gets really discussed enough. I think a lot of people assume that if you're a performer of any type, you're narcissistic in some way, or in every way, or you just crave that attention. But for some of us, our art is our healing. And if we can't perform our art or produce our art in whatever medium that is, then we're cutting ourselves off from that healing. And when there's a barrier like fear in the way, that makes things even more tricky. So helping people develop tools to jump that wall of fear, push themselves through it. You mentioned earlier about struggle, and I do feel exactly the same way you do, actually, that it's like, I see the beauty in the struggle. I see the results of struggle, and I believe that proof is in the result. And therefore, there's a part of me that thinks that we need that to at least some extent, right? But I also, I can't remember what the quote was, but it was like the release your belief in struggle, and release your belief in the need for struggle. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's a societal thing, but what worked for you? Or maybe you could, it's probably a variety of things, give some examples of how you learned to work through that fear and put on the show anyways, because the show must go on.
Well, when I first started to feel afraid and get stage fright, and stage fright it's actually, it's very common. People in the industry, and I'm sure you've experienced this when did you start performing? I actually didn't know the
Public school, really. Like I was in,
okay.
yeah.
So you experienced, let's say, the industry to an extent in your childhood. So when I was, 10, starting out and doing public performances, I was working with production, like full on production teams, and we were putting on like productions. Like it was like there was a director and stage manager and the whole nine. And so we as children we were treated like professionals, and we were performing with professionals often. We were just sort of like the non-paid part cast for professional productions, if that makes sense. So there's like a professional production that involved amateur children. So anyway, like we would be treated like professionals, and they would speak to us as if, we were adults in some senses. And the narrative that we got, or that I remember, I mean, I can't speak for anyone else. This is just what I remember, but it was like from both the cast and the sort of leadership end, it was like, if you're too afraid to get on stage, then just get off. Like you're not in the right industry kind of thing. And what's missed there is like human beings have fear, like all of us, no exception. Right. And when we are presenting ourselves in any kind of way in front of someone whose opinion we care about, there's going to be fear there. I mean, there's ways to manage it, but there's going to be fear there. Like when you ask someone on a date, you asking someone on a date is you caring about what the result is going to be of that, or how they're going to perceive you in, their mind. That can create stage fright, as it were. Going in for a job interview, going into a courtroom to, battle out a case. Like these things are going to create stage fright. And to sort of, first of all, tell a child, but second of all, tell anyone, like if you have fear, there's something wrong with you, it's so unbelievably just devastating and detrimental to that human being that it's like beyond words. And this was what we were told, or like at least was inferred to us over and over and over again. So for me, I was like, well, performing is the way that not only I heal myself and the thing that I find joy in, it's also the way that I can manage the troubles of my life, like frankly. And so it's not an option for me to not perform. It's not an option for me to like get out of the industry or get off stage. So instead of learning to build the capacity for more fear and learn to manage it, I buried it. And I overrode it, and I overrode my needs, and I abandoned myself over and over and over and over again. It didn't matter how sick I was before I went on stage. It didn't matter how upset I was. It didn't matter what I was going through. It didn't matter who just harassed me. It didn't matter. I would just show up and turn on. And so that's how I dealt with it for, I don't know how many years, and it's a dilemma, because it's like, sometimes you can't help the things that happen right before you go on, or sometimes you can't help, but things happen in life. Like you might have a loss and still have to perform. And that, that's sort of what being a professional is, to some degree. But I think where, let's say, the lines were really blurred for me was that it was sort of like, oh, okay, I can just feel like shit 100% of the time being off stage, and that's acceptable so long as I do a good job on stage. And now later in my life, I'm going, no, that's not acceptable. Like I need to feel good. You know what I mean? I need to not even feel happy, just be at peace, like find a sense of peace within myself on a general, day-to-day basis. And if I can't do that, then what am I doing? Like presenting myself as some type of role model, or like arguably shaman of musical transmission. You know what I mean? Like, what am I doing in this role, transmitting, quote unquote, healing through music, if I am utterly fucked behind the scenes, right? So it's not so much that I wouldn't, I guess now, like, override my hunger or my fear or my pain and get on stage should I have a performance that's scheduled. Like, I would still do that. But what's no longer acceptable is that I'm just hanging on by a thread behind the scenes, and sort of the only, like, escape from that is like doing a good job under the spotlight. Like, that was a long-winded way to answer what you just asked, but I hope that
long-winded is welcome here. So yeah, there's this idea of like being of service to others or being of service to self, and it's we kind of put a very distinct separation between them. But what I try to express to people all the time is like, we're not really good for others if we're not good for ourselves to begin with, right? It's like trying to help someone who's dying of thirst with poisoned water in a sense, right? Like that, the contaminants in that water are going to come through energetically. And so being of service to self is in fact being of service to others, because if you achieve some level of success, obviously you're never going to fully fix that problem, because we're humans and life goes on, right? New problems come up and new realizations come up. But if you're not working on that, then it's really hard to be of service to others as well. And part of singing for people, performing for people, creating any type of art for people is to try and pass on some of that healing that we're finding through it. It's the same thing as why I got into psychology to begin with, was because I needed a psychologist, right? It's we kind of pay it forward in that way. And if you're denying that part of you, or trying to like maybe act like you're beyond that in some way, I don't think that's not integrity. That's not being honest. And your audience will even just subconsciously pick up on that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the mirror neurons are a real thing. And yeah, as an entertainer, when I say the word shaman, I don't use that lightly. Like, from the beginning of time, sort of the entertainer of the group was the shaman, and they weren't there to be recognized for their talents. They were there to unify the group and channel source energy, if you will, to the group. And it was oftentimes done to unify people before war, right? To make sure that everyone was in lockstep so that they could be successful in battle. And so, when I say the word shaman, I don't say it lightly, and I take it seriously, in that as an entertainer, if you're put in a position where you're channeling, if you believe in that kind of thing, where you're channeling, source energy or any type of energetic transmission, even if you don't believe that it's coming from God or the universe, just you're still transmitting energy through song, through dance, whatever, through art. If you're put in that position, then you do sort of have a responsibility to show up in a manner that's like grounded and like whole. And I for a long time didn't understand that. I thought it was just about like making sure everyone was entertained and then let's all go home. I didn't, and it's not even that I didn't understand it. It's also that I couldn't have done anything differently. Like, I was just trying to survive. I was just trying to cope with what I was dealing with behind the scenes, which was a whole lot of like unresolved and recognized trauma. So I was just trying to hang in there. Like, it wasn't, we can only cope in the way we can cope, but it definitely, obviously as an adult, like I'm grateful to at least have the insight that like, it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to abandon yourself for this industry. you know, that's not necessarily helpful.
No, it's not. It's probably not at all, right?
Yeah.
And what you're saying, and I talk about this through magic. Um, you know, this work that we do and working through our shadow self and working through all the various energetic levels that make us up is a process that's considered purifying the channel. And in magic, the idea is that you can channel energy through source or through something else, through yourself, and transmute that into something else, alchemy, right? And the work of purifying the channel, clearing out the cobwebs, working on our traumas, working on, various aspects of ourselves, allows that transmission to be more pure. And obviously, like you'll kind of see it if people are really toxic and they're trying to do that, it does take away from it, right? And you'll notice that, like, artists, as they develop over time, is like, I really liked their early stuff, but then something happened, you know what I mean? And I think it's that person actually stopped being that type of channel. And I do believe in that there is a collective consciousness, if you will, that we can kind of tap into and share ideas and concepts with each other through music. And if you even look at the etymology of the word entertainment, this is something that's been going on through history, basically forever, and has had various names like shaman. Now it's performer, entertainer, singer, whatever. But all of those things, there's an aspect of it that we all relate to. Like, pretty much everyone likes music or some sort of music, or art or some sort of art, right? And that's because it taps into something very primal within us, something that's like, undeniable here as a being human.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, and there's loads of evidence on, how human beings respond to patterns and, our instincts related to music and how that changes the brain waves. And there's some really interesting research coming out on music and how it affects the brain. And I'm so excited to see sort of this field become more voluptuous and more sort of pop culture. And it's great to see music being taken seriously from a scientific sense finally.
Another thing I learned speaking to I won't name drop, but like speaking to an actress who's very high up in that industry, is she was telling me how they always seem like actors, actresses, performers seem very controlling. Like, I want this in my dressing room. I want this. It has to be just like that. All of these different things. And she said that that's basically, we have about this much control over what you see. And so for sure, we're going to use that much control when we can, because it's the only thing that helps us ground and remember that we are still people at the end of the day. And I think, with a lot of different things that we've been kind of seeing in the media today, like the whole Johnny Amber Heard thing, or Johnny Depp, Amber Heard thing, people kind of forget that these are human beings behind those characters that we've been watching in movies and those singers we've been watching on stage. And I think that, we have run them like show horses, and in such a way where we've actually, in a way, participated in destroying their mental health. And then at the other side, we make fun of them for it. So it's a really sad thing. And just, like the mental health of any human being is finally starting to be recognized, finally starting to become important. And, when you mentioned music and the effects, I mean, we are mostly water. And all you need to do is check out some cymatic experiments to see what sound, frequency, music does to water. And so just extrapolate that onto us. What would that have as a physiological effect on us, these different frequencies? And that kind of puts, not only creating music or singing or doing any of that, but also what you're taking in, right? Like what you're feeding yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you bring up the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial. I don't know if you've heard Russell Brand talk about the slap, the Oscar slap, I won't, whatever, describe that. Everyone in the world knows what that is. I heard, I listen to Russell Brand sometimes. I think he's really intelligent and has a lot of interesting things to say. And he basically just kind of summed it up by being like, I'm not going to give you a take here on who's wrong or right. What I am going to do is question why the hell we even have the Oscars at all. Like, why do we have, and he used something like this, like magnificent turd as like a representation for our culture. You know what I mean? Like, this is this whole structure is simulated meaning. And he's like, what's happening is it's starting to collapse on itself. And he said it way more eloquently than I just did. I mean, it was brilliant, actually. I would watch it so many more times. There's just so much he said in that take. But it wasn't just, to me, I didn't just take it as a take on like the Oscars and the simulated meaning around these like award shows. And to relate it to the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp thing, like Hollywood in general, like that whole facade, I would actually take it further and say, like, this is sort of like the facade that's built around like our culture as Americans and North Americans and Canadians, right? Like, this is the sort of like value structure that we are thirsty for. You know what I mean? Like, that's the problem. It's like, the problem isn't like, same thing goes with what Peterson just said about that model on Sports Illustrated. Like, yeah, what he said wasn't necessarily super kind. Like, I think where he's coming from, to understand sort of his values and in standing against authoritarianism, that makes sense, right? Like, what was the statement a little unkind or a lot unkind? Yeah, for sure. Like, I think you need to choose your battles, but that ultimately to me isn't the problem. The problem is, why does Sports Illustrated exist? The problem is, why are we fighting over diversifying objectivity? Like, it's still objectification at the end of the day, right? Like, this is still, so it's like we're lost in this, like, we're sort of fish in water and we can't tell that we're in water because, you know what I mean? It's all around us. It's like, we need to be looking at the water, as you just said, not the fish that are fighting. Like, the water is filthy, like these award shows, this culture around celebrity and fame, the way that Hollywood operates, these Sports Illustrated magazines that objectify women, and now they're doing something great because they're just diversifying objectivity. Like, what the fuck, you know what I mean, are we talking about? So anyway, this is all, I feel like it's all, as a woman in the industry, it's as I look into my past and I do, and I sort of go, all right, boogeymen, come on out. Let me face all of you, all the ones that I haven't faced yet. Let's see ya. It's putting into perspective for me, like, how the music industry itself, how Hollywood itself, how the entertainment industry as a whole, like, is the epitome of narcissistic abuse. And I'm like, it's sort of, everything feels irritating right now. So for me, that's where I'm getting fired up, in this conversation, but it's all related to me,
Well, there's even a difference between sexes in the industry too, because a male's view of the industry going through that stuff, even as a child, definitely as an adult, is not nearly the same as a female's view. Because like, our looks are not objectified in nearly the same way, right? Like, we can be whatever. But to the point of like the Sports Illustrated thing, okay, fine, we've got Sports Illustrated, that exists, that's fucked up. But what I find fucked up isn't, like, beautiful woman, that's not it,
right?
It's not that the fat is unsightly, it's not that the fat isn't beautiful, it's that it's unhealthy, right? It's that these people aren't necessarily prioritizing health, and instead of allowing that to be exposed for what it is, just naturally, we're telling people that you don't need to worry about it anymore. And that's the part of it that I find unfortunate. It's got nothing to do with looks or aesthetics to me. It's about the message that it's telling people, which is basically, you know, you don't have to worry about being healthy, right? And that's not to say that every person who's carrying an extra 5 to 10, 20 pounds, whatever it is naturally unhealthy. But, you know, not caring about your body in any sort of way, and I'm just beautiful regardless, kind of puts us in a place where we're not looking to improve anything as well, which shouldn't be the message we're sending. I think that it's we need to figure out a way to approach the everybody's beautiful with we should also be healthy, right? Kept in mind.
Okay, so this is so deep, right? Like, we know that right now both of us are walking into, like, you know, just a very complex labyrinth of thoughts and you know, history and whatnot. Okay, here's what I'll say about this. I agree that health should be part of the conversation always, period. And it's not. And I don't mean health by way of like someone's physique. I mean like fucking mental health, physical health, like holistic well-being needs to be part of the conversation. And the fact that it's not goes beyond like GQ or Sports Illustrated or whatever, and like whether they're putting a plus size model on there or not, you know, that statement that I just made goes beyond that. It's like whole picture, right? I think that if then the conversation of health is always part of the equation, then we can look at the history of times that, you know, there's been a model smoking on the cover of a magazine who's, let's say, thin. We can look at all the times that there's been, you know, a model eating a burger, or like all the times that, you know what I mean, McDonald's ads have made it into all of these magazines. You know what I mean? Like, we need to, okay, so like if it's about health, let's really fucking dissect that, right? The problem with it's like, yeah, like for sure we need to look at, like, we need to have a serious conversation about obesity in America, 1000%, right? But does that conversation need to be centered around what's beautiful and what's not? I don't know. I can't be the one to say that, because I think the problem, right, with striking up the conversation of obesity around a you know, a fold out that was meant to depict beauty in a woman. I think the problem with that is that we then get into this territory where we're like, it creates, let's say, a landscape for A, beauty ideals, and B, shame. And it's like on both sides, right? Like, I don't think beauty ideals are healthy at all, period. I don't give a shit whether it's plus size, whether it's rake thin, like nothing should be idealized. Nothing should be an ideal. So it's complex because it's like, I think we need to hold space in our hearts for all different types of beauty and learn to appreciate bodies and beauty that come in all shapes and sizes. And I think we also need to like be careful of what we're saying is unhealthy or healthy with respect to shape and size, because different people come in different shapes and sizes, and that could be healthy or unhealthy, you know, depending, right? Like we can't know unless we do like a diagnostic analysis from person to person, I feel. Obviously, when it comes to obesity, there are general statements we can make about like what's healthy for a heart or not, right? I'm just covering my bases here, like in terms of like trying to think this through. But what I don't think should ever happen is like, I don't think we should ever be shaming people into action. I don't think we should ever be, you know, shaming people into what's healthy and what's not. Like, that's just going to do nothing. So I fear the conversation around, well, is this healthy when it comes to putting a plus size model on a magazine? I fear that being the argument because of all these other things. And because, like, frankly, we've put other unhealthy shit, you know what I mean? Like, and not only that, right? Not only that, like, as I was saying, like, the thin model with the cigarette, yeah, that's unhealthy too. Not only that, but fucking putting a woman on a magazine to idealize her as beauty archetype is unhealthy in it of it fucking self. So if we're talking about health, we should be talking about deconstructing a beauty ideal, not diversifying objectivity of women. You know what I'm saying? Like, if health is the fucking conversation, then let's talk about what beauty ideals, thin or otherwise, white or otherwise, beauty ideals, period. Let's talk about what the fuck that does to someone's health. You know what I mean? Because I'm pretty sure it's fucking a lot of people up. I'm pretty sure filters on Instagram are fucking a lot of people up. You know what I mean? So like, just this presentation of what beauty is in general is fucking unhealthy. Like, that to me is the water rather than fish on fish.
Exactly. And if we make the baby the image and, we throw everything out, it's not going to serve us. We really need to, and even on the concept of health, start connecting the dots between mental health and physical health, and connecting the dots between holistic health, right? And I think that's I believe that we're going through a bit of an evolution right now. And unfortunately, our push to try and maintain or try to achieve some balance, it's almost like being on a seesaw, and we've just put way too much weight on the opposite side to try and maintain a balance. And now we're going to get to a point where we're going to have to peel some of these weights off. But right now the weights are these different categories and these different, group think type things that are popping up around all of these topics. And it's unfortunate, but I do see it as progress in a lot of ways, because at least it gets the ball rolling. We're talking about it, right? Like, it gets the conversation to be had. Like, look at how many different things you and I have even worked through together or individually through this conversation, right?
Totally.
We need to be having the conversation, though. And when people are too afraid to, have the conversation due to censorship or self-censorship or just stigma, or I want people to like me, or whatever that cause is, that's the problem. And that's why I like to kind of, get into the dirt a little bit and muddy myself up, build up some natural immunity to, my toxic environment and that poisoned water, because it's there, right? And I think in general, what this evolution is going to kind of lead to is this rise out of like morality, which is like basically a construct that we create within tribes that tells us what's right and wrong.
Right.
To a place of actually being conscious, or like a place of pure consciousness where we actually see it all as a whole, more holistically. And a good place for us to start doing that on an individual level is to start, prioritizing our health, both mental, physical, and all about the above, mental, physical, and spiritual health, and start making that a priority in our life.
Definitely. And I love that you brought up more like the conversation about morality, because I feel like that's where as human beings we go kind of really awry. And coincidentally, I guess you could say, Peterson does talk about that a lot. And I just want to say, I mean, it's controversial for me to say, a female in the arts, for me to say, like, I listen to Peterson and I respect that man greatly. It's controversial for me to say that, but I can say that and say that I vehemently disagree with his approach with what he said about Yumi on the magazine. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that I understand where it was rooted from. It was just the wrong, for me, like, it was just the wrong way to say it, and just not the battle to like be participating in with that claim, right? Can I still listen to him though? Yeah. But it's controversial. It's controversial because people that don't understand him as an academic and what he has to offer and are just seeing headlines are basically like, he's a white supremacist, etc. And, to be associated with that is obviously like not something anyone wants to be associated with. But on the topic of morality, right? I mean, it just kind of full circle. It's like the hypocrisy that is born out of superior, to creating a superiority around your morals versus someone else's is like everything that's wrong with humanity. I mean, and all at once, it's like, there's compassion to be had for that, because that's how we were trained as a society. You know what I mean? Like the religious beliefs and how, we were taught, how we've evolved as a society is predicated on these moral laws that are measured against, the ultimate morality, which is maybe something like Jesus or God would like do, right? It's like, how do we get as close to that as possible, right? But we're totally fucking it up. Like, if that's the path, we are fucking sideways, So I think the point is to like not make that the path. The point is to like be as good of a human as possible, and not assume that your sins are above someone else's sins and that your morals are somehow better than others. Like, as soon as you think that your sins are above their sins, or your morals are somehow cleaner than theirs, like as soon as you think that, I think that you've lost. I think that actually, like, you need to really check your morals and really check your sins, because you're clearly missing something if you don't see that we're all fucking in this pig pen together.
I think it was a necessary thing for a long time, right? Like, I think it's something that we needed to establish in order to start to create some type of order out of the chaos that is being human. But I also think that it can only take us so far, and I think we've reached the end of that. I think that we're at this point where we need to like almost take a bird's eye view of what we've created here and throw out some trash and pull up some gems out of it all, because there's a lot of great things that we've achieved. And like I said, it's evolution. It's messy, but that's what it is. But would tell people about what it is that you do. You're the Be Fearce.
Yeah. So probably, I guess it was about 2016. I became super burnt out from running 2 careers at once. So I was still performing and singing. And I was, at that time, actually, I was hitting some serious walls with my music, because there had just been too many compilations of experiences in the industry that I just couldn't override anymore. And I was also simultaneously a fitness coach, and I'd been teaching fitness for several years, and I was running these 2 careers at once, trying to make both of them fly. And I just kind of got to a point where I was like, I either have to fuse these 2 together and make something out of it, or I need to drop one. And I can't do that. I can't drop the fitness because it was my money maker. And I couldn't drop music because it was my soul and my breath. So I was like, all right, well, how do I just put these together then? And at the same time as that, I had just gotten into therapy and just started to work through some of the trauma in both the music industry and in my childhood. And I started to become very, very aware of this thing called stage fright and how it was impacting me, and how, and sort of all these wounds that I, needed to heal from, let's say. And it gave me this idea to take everything I learned in the wellness industry over that, past decade, and everything I knew about being a performer, and everything I was learning through, my personal therapy, but also starting to study psychology and starting to take trauma trainings and things like that. And I thought, let me put together a program that helps, essentially musicians and artists and performers manage their own stage fright and manage their own blockages within, the artist, let's say, journey. And that was the, let's say, inception of what Fearce Academy is today. Fearce Academy being spelled Fearce. And the point of it was that, I guess, if there was a thesis that I have, it's that we don't become fearless as human beings. We don't become these, like, I guess, perfect, purified beings of light that have no wounds and no flaws and no fears. We actually just learn to integrate it better. we learn to integrate our fear better. We learn to build a larger capacity for more fear so that it doesn't take us to our knees every time it shows up. We learn to become whole with our shadow side. And that is how we rise. We don't rise without our shadow by breaking little pieces of ourselves off and shoving them down to the bottom of the shame barrel. We actually take those pieces and we hold them in our heart and we heal them through becoming whole with them. So that's essentially the structure of Fearce, is like, we need our fears to be fierce in order to like attack forward and march forward in this, this career of being a shaman of music, or being a channeler of music, or being an entertainer, or whatever, being in front of the camera, or being a high performer in any way, really. Like, we need to integrate our shadow side, and we need our fears to be fierce. So that's where Fearce Academy came from. And the coaching is structured around how to integrate your shadow self, so that you can be a more badass, more resilient, more mentally healthy, physically healthy, more confident individual, both in your performance life, whether your performance be an artist or a lawyer, right? And in your personal life as well.
What type of advice would you give to someone who is, like anything, exercise, developing a skill or an art, taking that first step? What would be your advice to someone who's struggling with that first step? Take it.
Just take it. That's the only thing you can do. I talk about how, we're not always going to be intrinsically motivated, right? Like, there's people that I'm seeing in the wellness field, this happen specifically because wellness and entertainment are starting to make a crossover. Like, everyone and their mother is a coach now, and you have to be on camera and promote yourself on social. And so people are learning how to sort of be some type of entertainer, especially in the wellness community and for coaches. And I hear a lot of people ask me like, how do you, stay and consistently inspired, right? Which I would link to motivation. Like, when you're inspired, you're motivated to create usually. And, my whatever response to that is usually you have to create a space to create. Like, yes, sometimes you're in your kitchen doing your dishes and like the Holy Ghost comes through you, you know what I mean? And you drop everything and you go write down the song idea, or you go write down the blog post or whatever it is, right? Like, yes, that happens sometimes, but more often than not, you have to actually like a job, you have to carve out time to sit down and be bored and think about things and write a bunch of trash down, and eventually something good will come of that, right? Like, you have to create space to be creative. And when you do that, like, you are working a muscle that will get stronger and that will become more fluid over time. Like, creativity is a muscle and everyone is creative. It's just a matter of whether you're practicing it or not. But like, to expand that out into the broader sense, like, how do people take their first step or keep going even? It's like, you need discipline. You aren't going to be intrinsically motivated all the time. You aren't going to be intrinsically inspired all the time. But what you do have control over is your discipline. You do have control over holding yourself accountable and carving out time to be creative, so that inspiration does have a chance to come through, versus you filling up your day with busy work and, every spare moment that you're not doing busy work, you're on TikTok, right?
I love that TikTok. I have successfully never downloaded that to my phone, so I'm doing well.
I love TikTok, by the way.
It's true. You just kind of have to show up, right? Like, whether it's writing, whether it's exercise, whether it's music, it doesn't really matter what it is. Like, prioritizing the time. There's a lot of kind of perversion on words that has happened. Like, we've dirtied up some words that are actually really beneficial to us, like responsibility, like integrity, like discipline. Mm-hmm. too many people think of discipline in maybe the religious or the military sense, you know, where it should be more like the martial arts sense, where it is literally, you know, holding yourself accountable. Even the word judgment, we've kind of like twisted the meaning and muddied the meaning of that word so much that nobody likes to use it and like actually be able to use judgment, right? Whether you are judging yourself or whether you are judging others. But like having a judgment of yourself, I think, is important, because that's where your accountability comes from, right? Like religion presents us this idea that there's God sitting up in the sky passing down judgment, and that feels dirty. But what if, you know, to not turn us into Satanists here, but what if you are that God that is passing that judgment on you? Do you not trust yourself to judge yourself kindly and fairly and objectively? If you do, then judgment's no longer a dirty word, right? And if you then employ judgment from that level, you're going to want to hold yourself to being disciplined, because you know, how the hell else am I going to achieve this? We think of things in nature as, because we don't see their movement, we don't acknowledge that there's even any movement there. But even just the simplest organism like a plant has to maintain a certain amount of discipline every day in order to just survive, and even more so if they wish to thrive, right? And I know we as humans like to separate ourselves from nature, but guys, I got some news for you. You're part of it, so you might as well behave accordingly. And you can look to nature for cues on how that would work. And so, you know, it's very important to keep a holistic view, and that includes keeping ourselves in nature, or like what you exampled earlier with the Jordan Peterson topic, you know, being able to look at what he does and what he says as a whole, instead of being like, I disagree with that, I wouldn't have said that like that. Overall, the man does a lot of beautiful work and a lot of brilliant work that he has presented to the world at great cost to himself, and will go on to benefit all of us. He's not perfect, none of us are, but that's why we want to keep this holistic view, so that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, or, you know, becoming miserable when there's so much beauty in this world.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of things you just said there really resonate. And especially too, what's sticking out for me is the nature aspect. I was listening to Jacob Wabati. I may have mispronounced that. He's a man of knowledge, and there was a video of him describing Turtle Island, how Turtle Island came to be, which is essentially what we know as North America now. And he, you know, towards the end of, I'm sorry, I have to just turn that off, or it'll keep ringing.
No worries.
Okay, 1 second.
No worries. I can do a little edit.
I'm so sorry about that.
No worries.
Doing podcasts from home, right? Anyway, his whole, you know, claim was, at one point he was saying, like, we were born out of nature. We came from nature. Like, why aren't we sort of returning to those? Why don't we respect those natural resources? Like it's our lifeline, because it is. Like, nature can exist without us, but we can't exist without nature. But also look at where we're getting our energy from. You know, like it's like we came from nature. I think he said, like a flower in a flower pot. And then he said, now we're eating from McDonald's flower pot. I was like, wow, you know, it's again, just the kind of the bigger picture in terms of how maybe askew we've gone from what's important and maybe what we could be valuing. But it's also like, it's also, you know, not something that we should be beating ourselves up for, because we are a product of our environment.
And evolutions are messy.
Yeah, lots to say. I love what you said about being your own. What's that?
And evolutions are always messy.
Oh, I froze here. Are we back?
Yeah, we're back.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I think it froze.
Evolutions are always messy, right?
Yeah.
Like it always is. Growing pains, right? Like we went through it when we were teenagers. Or another analogy for it is like birthing pains. It's almost like the world is giving birth to a new version of itself. And that is messy and it's complicated. And it requires having difficult conversations and looking into the dark a little bit. So I'm glad to know that there's people like you out there willing to do that work. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I can like take the credit or whatever. I'm just trying to create less suffering for myself, really. Like, at some point you sort of realize that the only way is through, as cheesy as that is, because it's like a slogan or whatever that's been whatever. It's a valid statement. I know that it's cliche to say now, but it's doesn't make it any less true. Like, really the only way is through. And at some point you realize that, and you realize it, and then everything that comes up it's like just as true. The first time I ever faced my trauma, I was like, oh, cool, I get it. I'm not going to be able to like continue escaping this. Like, the only way I can make this go away is if I like actually face it. And then it's like, now everything that shows up, it's like, right, I have to face this too now, I guess. There's no way to keep this one at bay either.
That might be your answer, but we'll wrap this up by, if you could go back to the younger version of yourself, what would be your advice?
Well, I guess today, I would say I would actually warn against the illusion of fame. And I would just put a tighter rein on that and just say, like, really watch out for getting caught up and trapped in the lust for, let's say, like, validation, because that's not what you ultimately seek.
Oh, looks like we froze again.
Yes.
Right at the good part.
I don't know if it came through what I said, but
I don't think it did, but that's okay. I think I won't make you try and repeat it, but tell people where they can find you.
Oh, we're back. All right. Tell people where they can find me. janeybrown.com is my website. Pretty straightforward. And janeybworld is most of my social handles. So like TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and things like that. I'm mostly on Instagram and TikTok these days, and a little bit of YouTube here and there. So yeah, that's basically where you can get me.
Awesome. I'll drop those links in the description for the video. Thank you very much for doing that and everything else that you do, because I believe in it a great deal and I know it's needed. So thank you for being you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for this conversation. It's always good to talk about the ins and outs of the world of entertainment and music. And yeah, hopefully I can be able to, pass on the things that I've learned to help prevent other musicians and artists from suffering in the same way that I did, and probably some of the other old G's in the music industry did.
I hope so, but we definitely need it. But we'll say bye to everybody at home, and that's that.
Yay, see you later.